Greetings, in this video we'll learn how to make a test available to students. So far we have created our questions in a pool and build a test with pool questions and unique questions. Now we can deploy the test to our students. All tests can be accessed from the Course Tools dropdown, the Test Surveys and Pools, and Test Link. This is the test that we just created. We're going to deploy this test on quizzes and exams, where students can take it. Although we can post a test in any content area or content folder, for this demonstration, I'm going to deploy the test to quizzes and exams because this is a dedicated content area that students can easily access. We're going to hover our mouse on Assessments, Tests. While we're on this page, I would like to point out that you have the option to create a test from scratch right here by taking the Create Test. This is a quick and easy way to create a test and immediately deploy it on your page. However, we strongly recommend following the steps outlined in these tutorials by creating the question first, building a test next, and finally deploying the test, as these steps prevent students from accidentally seeing a half-completed test. So today, we're going to add an existing test to our page. So I'm going to select Test 1 and Submit. We are now in the Test Options page. This is where we make settings that control how the student takes the test. First, we need to name the test. By default, the system picks up the name that we provided to the test when we created it. If you would like the students to see a different name in quizzes and exams, you can change it here. Next, you see the test description and instruction, which the system has automatically populated from test settings. Below, you have the option to show the test description and instructions to students before they begin, which is a good practice. You will notice that some settings have already been made. For example, Open Test in a new window has been set to No. I'm going to leave it as is. Next, we come to test availability. We're going to set Make Link Available to Yes. If we don't change the setting, then the test remains hidden to students. Below, you have the option to add a new announcement for this test, which means when you hit Submit on the screen, an announcement appears in eLearning that lets students know this test is available to take. I'm going to leave this to No, as you can always post a separate announcement. Next, you can select the number of attempts for this test. If it is a high-stakes test or a proctored exam, it's only going to provide one attempt. In this case, I'm going to select multiple attempts to show you that you have the option to either allow unlimited attempts or a certain number of attempts. I'm going to select certain number of attempts and allow students 2 chances. Note that you then have the option to score attempts using a certain logic. Last graded attempt, highest graded attempt, the lowest of the grades, the first grades, or an average. This is a way to apply a penalty for taking the test more than once. In this case, I'm going to leave it at last graded. Next is forced completion. Forced completion is a setting that requires a student to take the test in one sitting, which means if they begin the test and they end the test for whatever reason, they will not be able to save and continue. While this setting works, we do not recommend using it. There are many technical issues that might cause a student to stop a test. Even if the student can resolve the issue, forced completion prevents them from completing the test. So we do not recommend using forced completion. Next, we will select a timer and select the shortest possible time frame within which this test can be comfortably attempted. So I'm going to set this to 15 minutes. Note that if you do not select Set Timer, this means a student can take as long as they need to complete the test. Next is Auto Submit. Auto Submit is a feature that submits a test after the time frame has passed. If Auto Submit is turned on, it means that once the time runs out, the test is automatically submitted. Therefore, we strongly recommend using Auto Submit for any test or quiz that is graded. Next, we come to the display. The display after and display until are timestamps that control the time frame during which the test is visible to the student. In this case, I'm going to leave them blank because I want the students to see the test immediately. Next is the password field. In this case, I'm not going to enter a password. Next, we come to test availability exceptions. And we'll talk about this in a separate video. Now, we move on to the due date. The due date is the last and final date after which the test is considered late. Notice that you also have the option to prevent students from starting the test if the due date has passed. But please note, if you anticipate students taking the test later than the rest of the class, do not activate this option. Below, we see the self-assessment option. This is a setting that feeds the test score to the grade center total. If this test does not count towards the grade total, then you can exclude the test score by unchecking this box. Next, we have Show Test Results and Feedback to Students. In an online test, you have the option to let students see how they scored on the test, what they answered, whether they got the answers right, and what the correct answers are. In these two rows, you can select what the student must see. Depending on the nature of the test, you may want to show or hide this information. If this is a high-stakes test, you may want to leave everything blank. This means if you uncheck scores by questions, then students can only see their test score and cannot see whether they receive points for every question in the test. The last area is test presentation. By default, all the questions are presented to the students at once. So the students can scroll up and down and look at the questions. So the students can review all the questions in their test at once, as well as change their answers to any question. The other option is to present the test one question at a time. You can also prohibit backtracking, which means selected questions cannot be changed. I'm going to leave this as default, which is all at once. The last option is randomizing questions. If you turn on this option, it'll randomize the order for all the questions in the test. In other words, if you create a single attempt test then every student attempting that test will see their questions in a different order. And if you have a multiple attempt test, where the student takes the test more than once, then each time they start the test over, the questions will be randomized. So if you want students to see the questions in a specific order, do not turn this option on. So we have made all our settings. I'm going to submit. And now we're back in the quizzes and exams page. At the top of the screen, I see a success message. Please note, if you add your test to a populated content area, your new test always appears on the bottom. If I click on the drop-down button next to the test, I have the option to edit the test, which means edit the questions on the test canvas, or go back to edit the test options, which takes me to the options we just set up. Also remember, when you deploy a test, a grade column automatically appears in the grade center. So, if I go to my grade center, then you can see the Test 1 grade column appears on the far right. So when students take their test, their grades will ultimately appear here. This brings us to the end of this tutorial on how to deploy a test. Please watch our next video on how students take the test and how you can grade the test attempt. For more information, you can schedule training or email us with elearning@utdallas.edu.